What's the biggest plot twist you've seen in real life? Little town I grew up in had these two car dealerships on opposite sides of town, one Chevy, one Ford. They were bitter rivals. Attack ads, crap-talking salesmen, billboard wars, you name it. When the owner of the Chevy dealership died, it came out he'd also owned the Ford dealership by way of a shell company. No one saw that coming, including a lot of the higher-ups who worked at the dealerships. Story 2. I graduated law and got engaged to the girl I had been with through university. We both applied for the same graduate program and ended up working in the same office in Canberra. 3 months before our wedding, I found out she was cheating on me with our mutual boss, and I broke it off with her. Long story short, it got really ugly, and the two of us ended up in a very bitter court case over property. Canberra is a pretty small city, and the legal world is pretty bloody small there too. And everywhere I went, I bumped into my ex. It was beginning to seriously get me down, her too, as it transpired, and I applied for an Australian government overseas development job in Tuvalu, a Pacific island with about 11,000 population. It's quite a prestigious job to get, with only 2 positions offered for a 2-year contract on a rotating basis. I was successful in the application and moved on island to start my posting, to discover that my ex was the other successful applicant. I spent the next 2 years sharing a tiny office on a tiny island with the person that I quite honestly loathe more than any other in the world. Story 3. Years ago, my company was slowly going under, so I was looking for other jobs. I got a job with another company and put in my 2 weeks with my manager. Me. I've been offered another job and I'm taking it. I'm putting in my notice. Manager. Oh, well, we hate to lose you. Do you mind me asking where you will be going? Me. I'm going to company. Manager. Crap. Me. Silence. Manager. I applied for that position too. Me. I'm sorry to tell you that you didn't get it. Story 4. My grandfather's funeral. He was always a fairly reserved and distant father, as far as I understood. Would fit the stereotype of a northern dock worker who comes home expecting dinner to be in the table and then goes to the pub all evening via the bookies. Anyway, an unsurprising heart attack later, we're all gathered for his funeral. We're a big but close family, so we know everyone, including his friends. However, one guy turns up, about the same age as my dad and his siblings, who nobody knows. Long story short, turns out it was my grandfather's son, from another family, from another marriage. That went on for as long as his marriage to my grandmother. My grandfather had maintained 2 marriages over 40 years, having 7 children with my grandmother and just the one with this other woman. They knew about our family and kept away, and apparently my grandmother knew about them but kept quiet. Turns out he wasn't going to the pub every night. Story 5. I knew a woman who was going through divorce proceedings with her husband. He was always argumentative and borderline abusive towards her, certainly always shouting and demeaning. Then, just as the divorce was entering its final stages, he very suddenly died. His autopsy showed that he had a massive undiagnosed brain tumor which had been physically altering his personality. His wife felt all kinds of guilty afterwards and took it out on everyone she talked to and lost a lot of friends in the process. Story 6. The one guy I worked with was having a baby. He told me about his GF. Yeah, she's pretty big, but she's amazing. She's the one for me. I didn't know him very well, but as he talked about the pregnancy and so forth, and I gave him encouraging words and how his life was going to change so much, we bonded a bit. His baby was going to be born right before Christmas. He missed our work Xmas party because his baby was being born. We expect him to be gone for paternity leave, but he shows up a few days later. I feared the worst, that the baby had died. It turned out his girlfriend was lying about being pregnant to spend more time with him. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the fact that he brought up she was fat for no reason must have meant she was so fat you couldn't tell whether she was pregnant or not. She showed him someone else's ultrasounds. They talked about what they would name their baby, how they'd handle taking care of it, all that crap. I don't know what she thought was going to happen when 9 months passed and no baby. I guess it's good she came clean, though. A more diabolical person would have faked a miscarriage or something. But that was seriously messed up, shortly after the dude left, so I don't really know how he handled it. Story 7. 1991, I'm 19. Just signed the lease for my first solo apartment. Just got the first paycheck from my new job. I deposit the paycheck at an ATM. First, I'd always gone into the bank to do it. 2 weeks later, I get my bank statement in the mail and see with horror I have only $1.87 in my account. Way wrong. I should have at least $200. I'd been very careful with my spending. I'm freaked. I came within $2 of bouncing my first rent check. I'm literally reaching for the phone to call the bank when the phone rings. It's the police, asking if my ATM card was stolen. I check my wallet, and the card is missing. My job at a theater pub came with cash tips, so I didn't use the card often, and tell them I was going to call them anyway because I was missing $200 from my account. Well, we've got your card, and your $200, so come down to the police station, they tell me. I can't figure out how they have my card and the cash. Doesn't make sense. I drive down there. Detective says someone, let's call him Bob, pulled in to use an ATM and saw a man acting suspiciously while he was using it, moving back and forth as if trying to dodge the camera. Bob says the man then left the ATM, got into a car, and drove away at high speeds as if fleeing. Bob then went to the ATM and put his card in, which popped out. Bob then withdrew $200, and then another ATM card popped out. My card, Bob's card, had popped out because the crook had left my card in the ATM before speeding away. Bob realized he had withdrawn the money from my account and not his, so he brought my card and the cash to the police and reported the attempted theft. The detective gives me the description of the crook. According to Bob, it was a man 5'7", brown hair, round gold-rimmed glasses. I say out loud, "So, about my height, my color hair, and glasses like mine," before realizing Bob was describing me. I'd never deposited a check in an ATM before, so I was moving back and forth, following the instructions on the screen, filling out the envelope with my account number, punching the amount in, etc. I then forgot to take my card out and just left because I'm a damn idiot. I drove away at high speeds because I was 19, and that's how I drove everywhere. Worried the detective might be annoyed, I didn't tell him I was the crook. I just thanked him and left with the money I stole from myself. Somewhere in a box in my closet, I still have the police report where I'm both the victim and the perp. Story 8. A few years ago, I got invited to a friend's engagement party. They were throwing a huge bash because they were planning on a very small destination wedding. Later in the evening, my friend's fiancé takes the mic and starts thanking everyone for being there. "Sorry, Jen will be out to thank you guys in a minute. She's just having a wardrobe malfunction." He goes on to tell the story about how they met, how they were best friends, and decided to get engaged and finished along the lines of, "We wish you could all be there and that we could get married right now. So we're going to," out walks Jen in her wedding dress. Engagement party turned into a surprise wedding. Story 9. I once had a job interview. It was very early in my career, and I was trying to move 500 miles to a new place. I built prototypes and brought samples of my work. It was a 9-hour drive, but everyone seemed so enthusiastic that I figured it was a lock. I did not get the job. I found another job in the area and took it. 6 months later, they called and asked me to interview for the job above the one I had applied for. I was given an offer on the spot and worked there almost a decade. In the first few months, the people there told me the guy whose job I had, who would have been my boss if he hired me initially, had actually said the samples and work I did was beyond him, and he didn't want an employee who knew more than him. Well, I guess he doesn't have that problem since they fired him and replaced him with me. Story 10. My mom and a gal pal went to Mexico for break during college. They had a great time. While boarding the return flight, her friend says, "Sorry, I'm staying," and runs off. My mom hears from her a few weeks later after not being able to contact her at all. This was the 70s. IG long-distance calls and phones were scarce. Turns out her friend been sneaking off nights and having sex, the hotel gardener. She loves him and stayed in Mexico. That's all my mom knows. Hopefully they lived happily ever after. I found out the woman's name and believe I have found the correct one on social media. She got married in 1979, which lines up with the story, but she lives in Green Bay. Why now? Story 11. Worked at a small company summer during college. 2 dudes that work there, Mike and John, are best friends since high school, and Mike is getting married to his high school sweetheart. 9 months after the wedding, the girl has a baby, and it looks nothing like Mike, but a lot like John. And she reveals that she had sex with John on her wedding day before she actually got married. She divorces Mike, marries John the next day, and Mike and John are not friends anymore. To be clear, the divorce took some time, but as soon as the divorce was finalized, she and John went straight to the courthouse and had a civil wedding. And to be clear, Mike and John are not their real names. I have lost touch, so I don't know of any further plot twists. But the last I saw them, John was raising his child. Story 12. I was a Starbucks barista before the whole names on cups thing was big, or at least it wasn't really practiced in my tiny store. There was this very cute guy who came in maybe 4-6x a week, a little often, but nothing out of the ordinary. I flirted like mad. He flirted back. It was all great. Then he comes in with his fiancée. I was betrayed and treated him coldly from then on. A month later, 2 of him come in together and I find out that they are twins, and I'd shot down any chance I had with the single one. Story 13. One of my good friends in high school started hanging out with this guy from the other public high school in our city, and before long, they were basically joined at the hip. She had a huge crush on him, and was pretty sure he liked her too. But she'd never had a boyfriend before and was too shy to make the first move. One night they were hanging out and he told her he had something huge to confess. He was gay. They remained close friends. Then a few months later at a party, the guy introduced all of us to his younger by 1-year brother. The dude and his brother looked similar, had similar personalities, and the exact same sense of humor. Fast forward 20 years, and my friend is happily married to the brother. Her best friend is her brother-in-law, and he and his husband are godfathers to her kids. Sometimes the painful crush on the gay dude pays off, who feel bad for her husband for being second choice, or think she just substituted him for the guy she really wanted. Here is the context you are missing. When she met her now husband, she was already pretty much over his brother. She became friends with her future hubs, And it wasn't until a year or more later that they started dating after slowly developing feelings over time. Her crush on his brother was brief and adolescent, and she 100% loves her husband for who he is. Yes, the qualities the two brothers share in common were part of what made her develop feelings for both of them, because those are the qualities she finds attractive. Trust me, folks, there's no victim in this story. Everyone ended up happy and loved. Story 14. I was seeing a guy from Tinder for a couple of months, but it fizzled out and we stopped talking. I was on Tinder again shortly after and matched with a girl, I'm bi, who told me to follow her on Insta. I noticed the Tinder guy also followed her, so I asked how she knows him. She hits me with, he was dating my best friend for ages, but they broke up a couple of weeks ago because he had sex, some girl from Tinder. Story 15. I work at a prison and a lady flew all the way from Nigeria to visit her brother who was supposed to be incarcerated at my unit. She speaks little English, but we tried to explain to her that the inmate was not in the system anymore. He must have been released. We call a supervisor and it turns out he was released over 5 months before. She walks away confused and come back in with her husband who speaks English much better. We tell him the scenario and he asks, well, where did he go? He doesn't have any friends or family in the US. We told him, we don't know where he went. He was released. He could be anywhere. The guy, obviously confused, says, well, he couldn't have gone anywhere because he doesn't have any legs. So a legless Nigerian ex-felon with no ties is running, scooting around the US and no one knows where he is. Story 16. My esthetician was giving a Brazilian wax to a new client. New client goes on and on about this new guy she's dating and how he's a bartender at XYZ. Esthetician's boyfriend was the bartender. Always fun to find out you are knee-deep waxing the pussy of the woman you are being cheated on with. Story 17. Met a guy online. He was cool. Found out he lived less than 2 hours from where I live. We meet up. First time seeing each other's actual faces. Damn doppelgangers. Turns out his father is my bio father's older brother. Both our bio dads bailed before we were born. We both were abused as kids by teachers. Him at 15, me at 13. Both us have soy allergies and lisinouric protein intolerance. It's genetic. And both us joined the army and failed out during BCT due to undiagnosed mental health issues. Our lives had run parallel to each other. He's only a year older than me. Story 18. After my dad passed away, my brother did our ancestry line for fun. Come to find out we have a half-brother that my father didn't acknowledge. He was married before my mom, which we also didn't know. We started a relationship with him and his family, and all was well for a while. Now we realize he's a complete tool who constantly borrows money, cusses everyone out when things don't go his way, threatens hurt himself just to damn with our heads, and just makes our life miserable in general. Truly wish I had never met him. Story 19. For a semester in high school, my English teacher set up this game where one student was a secret killer. Every couple of days, the killer would sneak a note into a classmate's locker, backpack, textbook, or whatever that says, you've been killed. My best friend and I were trying harder than anyone else in the class to play detective on this, especially near the end of the semester. Near the end of school there were about 6 students left alive, and it turns out my best friend was the killer the whole time. They took the last 6 students who were alive and brought them in front of the class one at a time, so we could all debate if he or she was the killer or not, and the person could plead their case. The teacher brings my friend up and says, okay, tell us what happened. And my friend starts explaining how he had to be sneaky, and so on. So there was a good 20 seconds where I just didn't understand what he was talking about. There wasn't any great reveal or drum roll. He just brought him in front of the class and started explaining how he killed everyone. I lost my crap pretty good. The other twist that I forgot to mention is that at week 2 or 3, he went to a student that he didn't really talk to much and told him that he was the killer and that he needed him to kill John Deere 89. So he hands him a few of the notes, and from then on, he had a guy on the inside helping him kill people. That's why he could kill so many people without being caught, because if someone got killed, I was with my friend so I could vouch for him. The teacher said there was nothing in the rule book that said you could get another person to help you kill people. It was a huge gamble because the other kid could have just said I caught the killer and the game would be over. I forgot to mention that if you guess who the killer is, nothing happens. You have to catch them in the act. So when there's only a few people left, everyone is yelling, "You're the killer," and pointing fingers back and forth. Story 20. When I was a teen some 25 years ago, I played trumpet in the school band. We did a Halloween parade, but I had nothing to dress in costume for. I decided on a large black sheet with a hole in the top for my huge ponytail to stick out from the top in all its glory of crazy frizzy poof of curls, and a hole for my face and arms to stick out. I got a lot of, "Dafook, are you supposed to be?" I don't know. Or was it, I suppose. Anyway, after the parade, my mother wanted to see my locker before leaving, just to surprise check for anything not allowed. We passed by the auditorium and noticed a talent show just beginning. Mom pressured me to enter playing my trumpet, in this weird was-it costume no less. By the time I was to go on, I still had no clue what to play. I felt silly in my Halloween costume getup when nobody else was in costume unless they were dancing or a magician act. I walked down the aisle towards the stage with trumpet in hand, contemplating what to do in my nervousness. Heard whispers among the crowd as I climbed the little 3 steps of stairs up on the stage. I trip and fall up the remaining 2 stairs. I'm so clumsy. So I stand up and play it off like I meant to do that. Began acting silly and tooting my horn like a duck. Did a silly dance to an improv version of the most basic song to play, Hot Cross Buns, 3 Blind Mice. Ripples of kids are giggling in the audience. I see my mother's face contorted in displeasure that I'm not being serious enough to win this. Too bad, Mom. This is my time to shine in all my goofy, glorious weirdness. I wiggle my top knot poof and play a few jazzy bits of songs some older folks should know. Then to finish off, I act like I'm swimming a bit and begin playing Under the Sea from The Little Mermaid I had learned the year before. End it with pretending to drown as I left back down the stairs without falling. Mom took me out in the hall to have her fit for about 10 mins while the last contestants finished the show. She then goes off to look through my locker while I put away my trumpet and prepare to leave. I wait for her by the auditorium exit. They begin announcing the winners. I won first place. Suck it, Mom. Till my mom was a helicopter, she was always overly protective and watched everything I did. I wasn't allowed out of her sight often, but she did make me do my own work and applications when it came to my education. Story 21. Studying abroad in England, I planned a weekend trip to Barcelona with this girl. This is pre-cell phones. I overslept. Got to the airport like 3 hours late. As soon as I arrive, there's the girl. At the exact same time, we both say, "I am so sorry." Wait, what are you sorry for? Turns out she overslept too. British Airways changed our tickets for us. No charge. And we got to Barcelona a few hours late. Story 22. Was seeing a guy for a few months, and then he told me he didn't think he was ready for a serious relationship yet. Fair enough. Then he posted about his new girlfriend 3 days later, and now they are expecting in November. Plot twist or dodged bullet. Story 23. During the last year of my grandfather's life, he had dementia and was having trouble keeping track of reality. Before he was placed into hospice, he kept complaining about a man that was in his house. He would say that he would come around at night and that he was taking his things and using his stuff. Grandma, of course, kept reassuring him that she was the only one there. His doctor increased his medications because he was losing touch with reality so badly. Fast forward to my grandfather's funeral, and a man showed up that wasn't known by more than a few people in the family. Turns out he was an old friend of my grandmother's who showed up to give his support. In a small town like that, it wasn't exactly an unusual thing to have random people show up to the funeral home who knew the person at some point. Well, about a year later, my grandmother let slip that she is seeing someone, the guy from funeral. At this point, nothing too odd. They got to talking at church, and we thought it was sweet. Then a bit later, sweet innocent old grandma mentions that it's their 3rd anniversary. Grandpa died 2 years prior. This man was the person that Grandpa saw in his house every night. He was the reason that everyone thought Grandpa was going crazy. He was the reason that my grandfather was medicated to the point of being a vegetable for the last horrible year of his life, till Dr. Grandpa thought he saw someone in his house before he died. Turns out it was Grandma's boyfriend. Story 24. My friend in college was such a jock. Worked out constantly. Total womanizer. Had posters of women in swimsuits. Also pretty conservative politically. Few years later, he's in a relationship with a black guy and also converted to Judaism. They adopted a baby girl from Korea. Story 25. When I was a sophomore in high school, we had a rash of thefts occurring during classes. It was a small school, and we had no hall monitor or cameras in the halls. It went on for months until the gym teacher happened to catch the kid in the act of stealing from someone's backpack. There was a ruckus out in the halls, and my class ran out to see what was going on. The thief was the principal's son. The gym teacher was holding him by his wrist and was telling everyone he just caught him stealing. The kid then pretended to pass out, and he just fell to the floor while everyone rolled their eyes and went back to class. He was known for trying to get attention however he could. So cringy. Story 26. My mother's friend was married to a man for many years. They struggled to have kids because he had fertility issues. And then later on, she developed ovarian disease and had a hysterectomy. Years later, he cheats and leaves her blaming it on them having no children because of the hysterectomy. He and the woman he leaves her for proceed to conceive twins via IVF. Once those twins are born, his mistress finds out he doesn't have as much money as she thought. So she leaves him and the twins. So I mean, at least he got those kids he wanted so badly. Story 27. There was a cookie exchange at my work. An odd pairing cookie was a rosemary caramel. It was so delicious, I had 5 on my break. During the day, I was so inspired. I worked in a bakery. I was just having the best day. All my favorite songs came on. And then I started getting these burps. It tasted like the rosemary, but something was off. I started feeling weird and tingly before my lunch break. My hands started to feel odd. Now being the mixer for the day, I worked with heavy machinery and knives. Soon, a manager came by and asked if anyone had some cookies. Short while later, I find myself in a room with a handful of other people, all with odd issues. Some were confused. Others, their stomachs felt off. EMTs, poison control, local police, firefighters were all cramming into the room to examine us all. Turns out that odd pairing was weed cookies. We were stoned out of our minds. Story 28. I was getting late to catch a flight and hadn't checked in. Discovered when I reached the airport that I actually came to the wrong airport. Had to travel about 30 minutes to reach the other airport. Went to check in about 20 minutes before my flight. They didn't have any seats, so updated me to business class. Best flight of my life so far. Story 29. This girl in my high school class got into a top university for political sciences. Super smart, friendly, daughter of one of the most powerful politicians in my country. Her mom was investigated for some illegal money stuff, and turns out her tuition money was coming from that. She had to drop off because they lost most of their money. Story 30. This girl I know was embarrassed of her home, so whenever her boyfriend would go pick her up, she'd run to a subdivision like 5 minutes away from her house and waiting at the end of the driveway for her boyfriend. And when he would drop her off, she'd just walk into the backyard of the house and say that she goes in through the back door. Her excuse was that her roommates were nosy, so she didn't want him to come in. She did this for almost a year, until he knocked on the door of that house unannounced once and an old lady was confused as duck. Story 31. My father had one. He and my mom were never exactly happy. They divorce and my dad immediately marries another woman. She's way younger, blonde, loves doing housework, and just wants to dote on her man. Totally the opposite of my headstrong mother. My dad was even thinking how great this was because now his life is set and he doesn't never had to clean house or cook or anything. And his second wife gets serious disease and is gone in less than 2 years. But the plot twist is this. My dad starts asking, how do you cook? How do you clean and bank and pay bills? And taught himself, and now takes care of his own self, which shocked the crap out of me. Story 32. Willie and Devin egged each other's houses. Devin also egged Tristan's house. Events that happened after, in order. Devin egged Willie a second time because Willie did it once. Willie called the cops on Devin, but nothing happened. Tristan keyed Devin's car. Devin egged Willie once more in retaliation and even punched him, thinking it was him. Willie called the cops again and Devin got fined heavily. I heard he got arrested, but not sure about that. None of them actually egged each other the first time. It was me. I had 3 other accomplices. There were 4th and 5th egg victims named Isaac and John, but the former had no part in revenge, and John just went along with Devin. This happened around 2009-2010s, way past the statute of limitations in my state by now, when we were barely out of high school. Immature kids, whatever. Willie and Devin were notorious gits in our community, so we wanted to teach them a lesson. It helped a lot that Willie and Devin really hated each other already. Tristan was also kind of a banana, but this incident taught him to be a better person. Tristan is one of my best friends now, and I actually confessed to him what I did. He found it funny and was still glad he had the adrenaline to key Devin's car. He kept quiet about it. Story 33. My buddy and his girlfriend took a train to London to see a band play. It was a long journey, almost an hour, with a few stops, and once they were 1 stop away from London, they realized they didn't have the concert tickets. They got off the train, checked their bags, searched every pocket, checked their bags again, and decided to go back home to look there. They got back and found the tickets on the table in the hall of their house and headed back out again. When they were arriving at the station for a second time, they had to wait because there was a potential bomb threat. It turned out there was an unattended bag which was being checked over by the bomb squad. Whose bag? My buddy's girlfriend bag. She'd left it at the station after looking for the tickets. Story 34. This isn't my proudest moment either. But whatever. I was 19, and I just started a job at a new sushi restaurant. Well, the manager that was showing me around my first 5 days was young and pretty cute. She seemed flirtatious, but I wasn't trying to push or assume anything because I was a new hire. Well, after that week, she went on a vacation for a month to the Philippines, so I kind of forgot about her. Well, a month later, she returns and she is out drinking. So at 2:30 in the morning, I get a random call from her saying that she has been drinking and is now driving, which I hate. And she wanted to talk to someone. Anyway, after a lot of bullcrap from her end, she ends up at my place because she needed to go to the bathroom, and I wanted her off the road. She ends up deciding she shouldn't drive, and she wants to stay the night. So I set up the extra futon for her, because she is my manager and I ain't trying to cause no problems. Well, she decides that she sobered the duck up when I turn out the lights, and she starts getting talkative and flirtatious. Things escalate, and I end up stopping it before we have sex. At this point, it's 5 in the morning, and I ask her, "You good to drive?" She responds, "Yeah, I should probably get going. My husband is at home waiting for me." What the duck? Story 35. I was adopted from South America to the US when I was a toddler and have no memory of my birth parents. I had an older friend mentor I met in college. I knew him as Mike. When I learned that my birth mother passed away, I got a few of her belongings, including some pictures. Who was in these pictures? Mike? He was my birth father. Story 36. One of my friends was convinced that they were straight for ages. Used to laugh about lesbians hitting on them. Not at the lesbians, mind you. They just didn't get why it happened so much. Flash forward a few years. Whoops! They were gay all along. Story 37. An 85-year-old woman, the widow of a hero soldier in Watu, neglected by her friends and her children, having to sell her house that she could not afford and move to a much smaller one, but always helping people and looking after others, unfailingly polite and kind, suddenly announced to the sensation of the entire village in Scotland where she lived that the new tenant of the castle, on the fringes of which was her small cottage, had asked her to marry him. He too was an elderly man, but he was, and indeed is, a brilliant geneticist. The man who cloned Dolly the sheep. He's a knight, a professor at Edinburgh University, and a multimillionaire many times over because of all his patents. They were married last year, and all her rich, grand friends who neglected her and only invited her round to their nice manor houses because she would pour tea and act like a maid must now defer to Lady Wilmot. This time about her first husband, who was called David Haddon. This also has a kind of twist. Every year, long after his death in the 1980s, strange little trinkets and sweets would be sent to his house from, of all places, the Himalayas in envelopes covered in hundreds of Anna stamps or just unstamped envelopes, envelopes with non-European writing and symbols. My mother asked Sarah what this was all about. Apparently, when the Second World War, he immediately signed up as a second lieutenant and went to France with a regular regiment. There was only one problem. Whenever he or his platoon got into any form of danger, he would immediately faint, literally fall to the floor in a swoon. He got the reputation for being windy, which was humiliating to him. They were going to cashier him, which would have been terribly shaming in a war when everyone else was fighting. So instead, they sent him out to India to join the Indian Army. Some doctors there diagnosed his problem: severe narcolepsy brought on by adrenaline stimulus. He was classified as the British Army equivalent of 4F, which is the worst health categorization you can get, and they put him in charge of some Gurkhas who had all themselves been seriously wounded and could not fight. They were all sent off to some hill station where they could do no harm. Anyway, he somehow shared a plane up to this remote camp with Orde Wingate, who, if you don't know, was a general and really the father of guerrilla warfare. Wingate was complaining that he wasn't being given any proper troops to conduct his Chindit raids deep behind enemy lines into the damn jungle infested with bloodthirsty enemies. Haddon immediately volunteered himself and his Crocs, and off they went, conducting some real first blood attacks 300 miles deep into Burma with no other support than airdrops, attacking supply lines, ambushing staff cars, blowing up rear bases. The only problem was, whenever they were conducting attacks, he could conk out, keel over, nothing daunted. His men would prop him up and carry him with them in a litter whenever they were storming a machine gun nest or whatever. Lord Mountbatten, who was head of Southeast Asia Command, heard about one river crossing conducted under machine gun fire with Haddon, by now Major Haddon, being carried on a bed of palm leaves on the heads of his men as they waded forward, fast asleep. He mentioned Haddon in dispatches. A mention in dispatches is a very big thing, and he was flown to Delhi for a personal meeting with the Viceroy. His Excellency came out of the meeting with a very puzzled look. Very odd man. I told him, "Many congrats, credit to the Briton and all that." He stood up, saluted, and fainted. The little gifts and cards he was sent every year from the mountains of the Himalayas after the war were from his men, the old Gurkhas, who always liked him very much, and who, themselves extraordinary brave fighters, liked him very much, and were under the impression that the reason he kept on falling asleep in the face of imminent danger was because he was too brave. Anyway, that is the yarn Lady Wilmot told my mother, and then my mother told me. How much of it is true, I'm not sure. I hope most of it. Story 38. Dude was hitting on a woman, and she was totally into him. Then he starts complaining and whining about meeting women online that catfish him, and are much less attractive in person. She went from 100, 0 in point 2, and had a look on her face like, "Oh boy, please get me out of here." Story 39. Had a manager at my high school job in fast food. She was overbearing, micromanager, suck up to the GM, pain in the ass. She always walked around like hot crap because she was the youngest manager, like I give a crap. Happily married for 9 years in December, she is a stay-at-home mom with our 2 sons now. Story 40. My sister's boyfriend decided that he wanted to do more with his architecture skills. So he gave his 2 weeks' notice and moved to Haiti to help rebuild after the earthquake. They stayed together. He had bad phone service, so they mostly kept in touch through emails. He would send her long emails with photos and stories of what they were doing. This went on for a couple of months. One offhanded tip from a coworker, and a week of sleuthing later, and it turns out he never went to Haiti. He moved to Seattle to be with his fiancée and partner of 9 years. Story 41. One of my high school friends has a very strange brother who likes to pretend he's a girl on online games to get free stuff from people or something like that. After I graduated, I moved to Boston for college. They live in Texas. And last winter, I went back to visit my friend, and I was hanging out in her house when I saw her brother's laptop in the game room open with pictures of this girl on the desktop. And he said they were random pictures he found of some girl who posted on Reddit. They were SFW pics. But her account was inactive for years now, so he was using those pics to prove to someone he was a girl in the game he was playing. It blew my mind because that girl went to my school and was in my econ class. Story 42 was on a flight from Paris to Boston. I had the aisle seat across from a little hall of bathrooms in the middle of the plane. At one point, a man from a few rows up goes into a bathroom, and after a couple of minutes comes out and is just standing in the aisle, so it gets my attention. He keeps going in and coming back out, looking up towards where he is sitting. I see a woman who is sitting next to his empty seat shake her head at him, but he doesn't give up. Finally, after like 5 times of coming in and out, he finally gets the woman to come back there. The lights are out and most of the plane is sleeping, and once she comes back to him, they start making out in the bathroom hallway before he goes into one and pulls her in with him. They are in there for quite a while, and then he comes out and goes back to his seat, and a few minutes later she comes out and does the same. They are really flirty in their seats, and about an hour later, repeat it. The man goes in, and then she joins him. They end up doing this 3 times throughout the flight. My husband, who is sitting next to me, has caught on to what they are doing as well, and we made a joke about how they must be newlyweds on their honeymoon. We get off the plane, and the woman is standing at the gate waiting, and the man is nowhere in sight. As the people from the back of the plane get off, a completely different man goes up to her and gives her a kiss on the lips and asks her if she was able to get any sleep on the flight and calls her dear. Then they walk off towards the luggage area with their arms around each other. So apparently what we thought was an adventurous newlywed couple was actually a woman hooking up with her seatmate while her husband was sitting in the back of the plane. Story 43. Friends' parents were always so nice and welcoming. House was clean and boring. Pretty normal, quite life. And then they were caught making a large amount of meth and are still in prison now. Story 44. I worked for a bank at their call center as a workforce admin. We had a supervisor with a higher than normal personnel rotation. People would be doing okay. Then suddenly their numbers would drop and quit. In one of those, the guy quitting made a big ducking scene, called him out, insulted him, pushed him around, and ended up being restrained by other coworkers. At the HR meeting, supervisor is going off on this guy, bringing up every single thing the guy did wrong. He was boasting a bit too about how he had to fix all of this dude's mistakes. The entire time, the guy sat silent, said nothing, just stared at whomever asked him something. When the HR rep asked if he had anything to add, he pulled out a tape recorder and just played recording after recording. Of what you ask? Of the supervisor literally threatening the guy, harassing him, belittling him, and overall being a complete a-hole. Apparently, this guy would target overperforming agents and make their working environment hell to protect his position. I'm told the supervisor simply stared at his feet and nodded when told he was fired. The agent, as I understand it, was also let go, but very well compensated. Story 45. When I started school, I figured out that being raised by your grandparents wasn't normal. And then when I was a little older, I found out that the reason why was because my biological parents gave me to them. I was told that my biological mother was sick and assumed that I was maybe a few months old at the youngest. No one talked much about my biological father or his family, and I only met his father and stepmom once when I was a toddler. I rarely saw my biological parents while they were together and only started seeing my biological mother regularly when they divorced, and she moved back to the family home, and we became roommates. Years later, I found out that my biological father remarried and started a new ginger family right away. And then, around 10 or so, I was helping my mom, aka grandmother, with something, and it involved going through her lockbox of important papers. I found a paper pertaining to the custody case, and it was dated 2 months after I was born. I asked questions, and it turned out that my biological parents gave up after a week, and my biological father wanted to throw me in a dumpster. Lucky for me, my biological mother called her mom, and I was not thrown in the trash. My dad had been at work while all this went down, so that day he came home and found out there was an extra person there for the indefinite future. After my biological father changed his plan to putting me in foster care, my grandparents filed for custody because the thought of not knowing where I was literally nightmare-inducing. Biodad popped up a couple times when I was older, and the last time we were in contact, which was through email, he tried to claim that I had been kidnapped, which is stupid for so many reasons. We don't talk anymore because he's the human equivalent of stepping on a Lego, and I already have a dad who's like if Shepherd Book and Ron Swanson fused into one being. Story 46. I was at Bank of America during the banking crisis. Our CEO's lifelong ambition had been to see the Wall Street banks humbled, which he achieved when all were forced to reincorporate as regular banks. 24 hours later, he was ousted. He had literally 1 day to enjoy his victory before the rug was pulled from under him by the board. I was so moved I emailed him. I'd never met him. He responded graciously to thank me for his support. If they made a movie of that moment, folks would think it was made up. Story 47. My grandfather and grandmother were second cousins, and the entire family objected to their marriage because of the relationship. They actually weren't cousins. My grandmother's mother died when my grandmother was 3 because it became apparent she was illegitimate and my great-grandmother had been having an affair. So when my grandmother's father died, her brother Hugo inherited all the family businesses because she was not her father's child. He went on to marry the town escort. He also had a hunchback. This prompted my grandparents to flee Italy during World War II as they were now broke and outcasts from the family. They weren't actually outcasts from the family. They fled Italy because they were Jewish. They just hid the fact they were Jewish for 70 years until my grandmother's deathbed confession. The year my grandmother's mother died, a woman with the exact same name emigrated to the United States from Italy. Longer, slower version opposite of we originally were told my grandparents fled to America during World War II because of political reasons. And they were the only ones to come to America because my grandmother and grandfather had been shunned by the rest of the family because they were second cousins. The rest of the family went to Argentina. Also, we were told that my great-grandfather had never approved of them, which was why he wrote her out of the will and why they stole a great deal of jewelry on their way out of the country. They also always claimed that they had to flee Italy, mostly because my grandfather was a known leftist. Later, my family ended up reconnecting with our cousins in Argentina and discovered there was very little ill will towards my grandmother and grandfather. But we found out there were odd circumstances around my great-grandmother's died, and it was very likely my grandmother was illegitimate, which explains why my grandmother was written out of the will. The hunchback great-uncle is just added meat to the story. Even later, when my grandmother was dying, she told us that they were Jewish, but had hidden it from the family. My mom's whole life because they had encountered a lot of anti-Semitism in the US. And then even later on, an ancestry search. My mother discovered there is a reasonable chance that my great-grandmother didn't even died, but just fled the country. My grandparents first fled to Cuba and then bought fake identification for the US. My grandfather was a metallurgist and had no problem finding work in the US war effort, World War II, but couldn't keep work because every time they ran a background check, he looked very suspiciously like an Italian spy. They ended up in Chicago, where my grandmother did doctorate work under Fermi and got a PhD in chemistry. But she couldn't get a job as a professor there. She claims it was because of sexism. So she got a job in the science library and then went on to get a second PhD in library sciences. My father is Jewish, and they objected quite a bit to my parents' marriage because of this. The irony being that their objection was because they were afraid my mom would be doomed to encounter the same anti-Semitisms that they encountered. Every evening at 5 p.m., they would have banana tail hour, and my grandmother would smoke a cigarette and have a scotch. She was in the hospital for hip surgery and wanted her cigarette and scotch. She tried to bribe the orderly, but he brought her an addiction counselor instead. Story 48. In primary school, we had a WADDWI memorial lesson, and we were asked if anyone had any relatives who fought at the time. My friend brought in a picture of his great-great-grandfather with his wife. A girl also brought in a picture of her great-great-grandfather with his wife. The teacher said they looked similar. She put them side by side and looked shocked. We gathered around, and it was the same man who had kept his 2 wives a secret. Both had been married privately. They were cousins and didn't know. Story 49. Was working a new position in a new store for a company I had worked many years for. I try to develop very good relations with all my coworkers to help the day go by. I joke, I tease, and we sometimes would hang out after work. One of my coworkers, we will call him James, would frequently tease me back. One day, he wagged his finger, said, a girlfriend, in what I believe to be a teasing manner. Grabbing the moment to tease back, I stated, "Oh, come on, James. Only girls can get away with the head bob statements. And we all know you'd make an ugly girl." James' scraggly bearded face instantly burst into laughter as everyone around him looked terrified. He laughed and told me I didn't understand it, but I happened to say something really funny. Everyone else looked like the color had drained from their faces. Turns out, James had been born a girl, and I had met him 3 years after his full transition. He was good-natured about it. I told him to compliment his doctors who helped him because he was obviously living his true life that made him happy. Underneath it all, I was mortified and have never made a gendered joke since. You never know. Story 50. Years ago, when I was in college, I drove back to my hometown to spend Valentine's Day with my best friend, as we were both single and lonely. She got a group of people together and made plans for all of us to go ice skating together on V-Day. A lot of people we knew from high school were going to be there, including this one skanky girl my bestie did not like. When I asked Gira why she had invited this girl, she started gushing about how much this girl had grown and matured, and how impressed she was by her. Well, great, I thought. I love me a good success story, and I was really excited to see her. Well, ice skating never happened. That girl had gotten into an argument with her mother and her ex, during which she had threatened to death. Her mom and ex made the mutual decision to call 911 and have her admitted to the hospital. So my best friend and I went to visit her in the hospital. Now, apparently, when you are a female and you're admitted to the hospital for mental health concerns, they do a bunch of tests on you, including a pregnancy test, and they for sure pregnancy tested her. She dropped the bomb on us that she was 8 weeks pregnant. We congratulated her, of course, even though a baby was the absolute last thing she needed. And bless her heart, she seemed to be self-aware enough to realize this. And she kept telling us, no, this is not a good thing. But wait, there's more. Y'all thought the pregnancy was the plot twist, right? Well, little did we know there was much more to come. See, after leaving the hospital, my best friend and I decided to hit up the grocery store for some chocolates and sparkling G-juice to enjoy together. While at the grocery store, we ran into a guy that my best friend knew from elementary school. They made small talk for a few minutes. Now, apparently, he knew Skanky Girl too, and I can't remember why, but he brought her up. And here's where it gets good. He mentioned that the last time he had seen her was a couple of months ago while hanging out with a mutual friend. My best friend told him that Skanky Girl was in the hospital because she had threatened to commit to die and that we had just visited her in there. And get this, she's 8 weeks pregnant. Upon hearing this news, the poor guy's face went as white as a sheet. He told us that the last time he saw her, which was about 8 weeks ago, he had hooked up with her sans condom. A few weeks later, she had called him to tell him that she was pregnant and the baby was his. She didn't have enough money to pay for in surgery, so he had borrowed $500 from various friends and family members so she could have one. So what he and we wanted to know was this. If she was still pregnant, then where did the money go? It's been almost a decade and we still don't know the answer. Story 51. My new partner went to the same tiny college, 4,000 students, as my crazy ex, literally across the country. I didn't know until our first date and carefully tried to figure out if they knew each other. They didn't, but if they had, I probably would have bailed. They have a lot of mutual friends, which is how I found out he still tells everyone asterisk I'm asterisk the crazy one. Oh well, getting married next summer. Also, 23andMe says my dad probably isn't my biological father, but I'm still working that one out. Story 52. A friend of mine. Apparently he was sneaking out for a trip outside the city with his friends since his parents didn't let him go. They were on motorbikes, already on their way outside of the city. Suddenly, he got into an accident with another bike. It was his dad he crashed into. Story 53. Went into a job thinking I was going to be programming, ended up making children's videos instead. I meant educational videos for children. Story 54. I got laid off from a company I had worked for over 20 years. I went in for my exit interview and the HR lady said, Dwayne, from a site 3 states away, wants to hire you. I said, I'm not moving that far. She said, you can just work from home. Now, where I was working was a 130-mile round-trip commute. I got laid off and ended up with a commute that was from my bedroom to my den. Kept doing it for over 4 more years. Story 55? Told this before in another thread, but it's still hilarious to me. Guy I knew in high school English class was talking one winter day about how he was late to school because someone hit his mailbox. His folks made him fix it up before he went to school. He missed his ride and had to walk instead. But the school staff was cool about it and didn't punish him. A few minutes later, another girl comes into class and she's talking about how her morning sucked. She lost control going down a hill and hit someone's mailbox. She freaked out and drove off before anyone witnessed it and described a few details of the house. Mailbox guy puts 2 and 2 together and blurts out, "You hit my mailbox!" He wasn't super mad about it, and she turned beet red. It was hilarious at the time, the way they both reacted. Story 56. Finding out my girlfriend was cheating on me. She and I were going to go to the same college, but she started a semester before I did. Went up to visit her one weekend and had a great time on the campus and met a lot of cool people. Then I get a Facebook message from a guy I met there that was, "Hey, listen, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but think you're a really great guy, so I think you deserve to know the truth. She's been cheating on you." I decided to call her and ask her about it, and she admitted it. It was very painful because it was the first long-term relationship I had, and it was especially hard knowing I would have to see her on campus in a few months when I started. Funny thing is that pretty much all her friends that I hung out with when I was there visiting sided with me and ended up becoming some of my closest friends throughout my college years. Story 57. I went to college in Milwaukee, but I took some initial credits at a 2-year campus in Waukesha, a suburb just outside the city, to save money. The University of Wisconsin has a series of 2-year campuses across the state. They did some classes remotely, including German. The professor was on my campus, however, so we did one in-person session and then another section for the remote students at the other campuses all over the state. Anyway, we took a field trip one day to a really good old world authentic German restaurant to try some different foods. It was great. He invited all the remote students to come down, but didn't expect anyone to make the trip. The day we went, the prof told us one person was coming down from Wausau. almost 3 hours to the north, and also my hometown. Some of my classmates knew I was from up there and have this perception of it being this small up north town. It kinda is, but the whole metro area is probably around 100,000. Small, but not true small town living. I explained to them that Wausau isn't that small, and I don't know everyone there. It's not like that. Sure enough, this guy shows up. We look at each other for a moment, and he asks, "Hey, aren't you married to insert my wife's name here?" Damn. Yes, I was married in college. I was still in my 20s. I was a non-trad. We got married when my wife finished college, and then she supported us while I went back to finish my degree. Story 58. My high school sweetheart's best friend let me know that my girlfriend cheated on me with multiple guys at a party. I broke things off with her that same day. It was a very nasty breakup. Years and years later, I got a message on Facebook from her best friend. She explained to me that my high school sweetheart never cheated on me. She just wanted to break us up so that she could have me for herself because I seemed like the perfect boyfriend. Her plan backfired because I thought she was ugly inside and out. And as soon as I broke things off with my girlfriend, I wanted nothing to do with her. Between her plan failing and the guilt of ruining an otherwise great relationship, she decided to keep her mouth shut. I don't know if she told her best friend, but I know that I never will. Story 59. When I was 14 through 16, I had gay and bi friends who seemed a bit close. They thought I was, and I politely told them no. Turns out, they smelled the bi on me. Story 60. I never tried to have a girlfriend because I was certain that my father would be mad and ground me for years, if not something worse. He secretly worried why I never had any luck with girls. I avoided and rejected them because I was afraid of him. Story 61. Maybe this isn't that big, but here it goes. I'm a medic, and one morning we had a call for an older woman, 70s if I remember right. She was having cardiac issues, was in compensated shock from a very low heart rate. From the time we got to her home to the time we were in the ambulance, she had gotten much worse. We paced her heart, and she was doing good the rest of our hour ride to the hospital. About 16 hours later, we get called for a rollover car accident. Get there, and we have one male in the vehicle, unresponsive. Vehicle is upside down off the road. We get him out. He is in very bad shape. Wasn't breathing. So we intubated him and off to the hospital we went. Almost to the hospital, which is 30 miles away, and he goes into traumatic cardiac arrest. Dead when we get there. While we were on the way to the hospital, we found his wallet since we didn't know who he was. Saw his badge. Retired police officer and I remember from the morning. Our patient's husband was a retired officer. He was on his way to see his wife. Unfortunately, he stopped by the bar first. While it wasn't my job, I went with the nurse to talk to the wife and let her know what happened. She thanked me for being there for her family so much that day. Story 62. I'm in high school with my high school girlfriend. At her brother's, who recently got married. His wife, high school sweetheart, who works in town, hasn't come home from work. Everyone is worried. Form posse to go find her. Me and my girlfriend say duck that and go find a country road to have sex. There's already a truck parked in our ducking spot. Girlfriend recognizes the truck. Pull up next to it. Girlfriend's sister-in-law is having sex by her middle-aged boss. The aftermath pulled up a honked my horn. Her head pokes up, realizes who it is. She crawls into the driver's seat nude and drives away. Drive to girlfriend's brother's place. Tell him. He starts to cry. Her other brother is furious and tears their screen door off the hinges, then leaves to go find them to beat them both up. He doesn't find them. The cheater's husband files for divorce and split custody of their 1-year-old. Girlfriend's family suddenly stops wanting to talk to me or have me around. I think they're embarrassed all around. Girlfriend broke up with me a few weeks later. Weird. Story 63. Met a dude at my local 24-hour fitness who was wearing a Shark Punch shirt. Since most people have no ducking clue about that band, I immediately decided I needed to talk to bro out with this dude about his particular taste in music, metal. We get to talking, find out he's a drummer, lives locally, and wants to start jam some evil crap. Awesome. Exchange numbers and all that good stuff. Of course, however, actually meeting up with reliable musicians is much harder than it sounds, despite the enthusiasm. Around the same time, I was working security at a local bar and met this random cute girl who wasn't from the area, but was totally into me and wanted to hang out. Exchanged numbers and planned to meet up. When we finally did, we hit it off pretty well, but she had mentioned that she's still kind of dating around, but really liked me and hoped that I was okay with that. Totally was okay with that because I was also doing the same thing. We hung out maybe another time, but then shortly after was hit with the, sorry, but I'm kind of dating this other guy for serious line, and I said I understood and moved on. When Jim Guy and I finally managed to get together to jam, a friend of his was there to play bass with us. We get introduced, started talking about random crap, when Jim Guy happened to mention to the buddy about the girl he was dating. He and I both started sharing our similarities and preference of people we date, and I asked to see what she looked like. He's like, sorry, dude. She doesn't have any social media or anything like that, but I have a video of her at some restaurant we went to a few weeks back. Shows me the video. Me. Ah, she's cute. Him. Yeah, I met her smoking outside of some bar in LA. Me. Dude, she totally reminds me of this girl I was dating not too long ago. What's her name? Him. Kim. Me. Wait, really? That's so weird. I was dating a girl named Kim, too. What are the odds? Hold up, she has a Snapchat, right? Him. Yeah. Why? Me. I start trying to find her on Snap. Dude, what's her name on there? Asterisk, the friend at this time, is looking at the both of us like, oh damn, oh damn, oh damn, and starts laughing asterisk both of us at the same time. Kimber sleaze. Friend is dying of laughter at this point, and we both come to the realization that we are the same dudes she ended up staying with. We still ended up jamming anyways. Story 64. Only one I can think of right now is about my old roommate and her BF. So because we have the extra space, sometimes my mom will rent out rooms to people. We once had a roommate who was 18 years old at the time, and she was dating this 40-year-old loser. He'd feed her lies saying, I have this $1 million idea that's in the works, just BS after BS, so she would continue to spend her parents' money on him. He was living out of his car and would always try to sneak into our house so he'd have a free place to stay. He'd eat our food from the fridge as well as kick our dogs when he thought no one was looking. The girl's parents, who were paying the rent for her, told my mom she was not to see this person. For about a year, she acted like she wasn't seeing him anymore, but we'd somehow find out that wasn't the case. One time we found him hiding behind one of those ginormous Costco teddy bears in her room. And another time he rang the doorbell 10 p.m. on a Friday and showed up with a clipboard and had the audacity to list off to my mom all the things he'd like to change about our house. Like, what the heck? How many times do we have to tell you you're not even allowed in our house? Anyways, despite our attempts, she kept seeing this loser. And every time we'd catch him with her, we'd have to tell her parents plot twist. Was that right before the 40-years-old BF was seeing my roommate? He had been having an affair with her mother for a while, but the mom stopped seeing him when she found out all he does is lie and couldn't support her, let alone himself. When that ended, he then ended up dating her daughter. What weirded me out was that the daughter knew that her current BF had sex with her mom right before he started dating her. Story 65. After searching for years for my birth father, he offered me $3,000 to get lost as he was running for a political office and didn't want the embarrassment of an illegitimate child. Story 66. It's several years ago. I went down to the New River Gorge with my wife, then fiancé, and a group of friends to camp and rock climb over Memorial Day weekend. Over the course of the trip, 5 of us decided that on the last day, instead of doing another climbing location, we were going to whitewater rafting. We booked with a guide company and showed up in the morning ready to go. We hopped on the bus to the launch site, and when we got there, we were told that we were going to have an addition to our group of 5. The guy who was introduced to us said he got too drunk the night before and missed the first trip of the day that he and his friends had booked, but he lucked out since there was one open spot in the next trip. Great! We load up and start the trip, just shooting the crap with our new rafting friend. Over the course of the ride down, this guy seemed to know his way around a raft and seemed weirdly familiar with the river. At one point, our guide was pointing out a class 2 or 3 rapids section that he said was safe to swim through. This guy immediately jumps out of the raft, climbs up a rock in the middle of the river, and does a perfect 360 flip into the rapids. Near the end of the trip, our guide hits us with the plot twist. We're his first ever group. This was his test, and our suspiciously knowledge edition was his supervisor. We were all blown away. We spend the rest of the trip just piecing together the missed clues in the best bamboozle of our lives. Needless to say, the trainee guide passed his test and got a great first review and a nice tip, and we all got a great story. Story 67. I used to work with a guy in his early 20s that at the time of the story was getting ready to go with his family for his first out of the country. He was pretty damn excited, and we were getting the play-by-play of all the things, where they were staying and what they were going to do. He was preparing. Specifically, he would need to get a passport, but his birth certificate had been lost. When the replacement one arrived, Mom's name isn't the woman he's called Mom his whole life, it's his sister. Turns out his sister had him super young, and his grandparents basically took him on and raised them as their son, and no one ever told him the truth. So, sister was actually mom, and dad was actually grandpa and grandma. Real dad is unknown. He took a few days off work to sort himself out, still went on the trip, still apparently had a blast. Story 68. I have a coworker, Joe. Great guy who has an equally great wife, Nina. Over the years, and even prior to meeting Joe, multiple doctors told Nina she would be unable to get pregnant on her own due to problems with her ovaries and fallopian tubes. She and Joe decided that a child-free life was okay with them. So she and Joe married and lived happily for 12 years. When they started out, they didn't have much, but as time passed, they progressed in their careers and made a nice life for themselves. Finally, they got to a point that they were comfortable enough to buy a sports car for themselves, something Joe always wanted to do. It was the first new, off-the-lot car they ever owned. Now, Joe and Nina were in their early 40s at this time and figured they'd just coast on into retirement. Well, about 6 months after they bought the car, winter came. Nina got a case of the flu. She just couldn't seem to shake. She just felt run down and nauseous. Just not herself. After about 3 weeks of this, she went to the doctor. The doctor asked if there was any possibility she could be pregnant. She laughed at him and said, "I've been married for 12 years now and haven't had so much as a scare of being pregnant. Multiple doctors said it's just not going to happen for me. No way." But her doctor said, "Humor me and let me rule it out. Just do a urine test." Well, wanting to figure out what was actually wrong with her ASAP, Nina peed on the stick and, you guessed it, pregnant. So in their 40s and with 12 years of living just the two of them, they were expecting. After the initial shock wore off, they were actually pretty excited even though they had to sell the sports car, since a two-seater wasn't really going to work for them. A few months later, their son John came into the world the usual way. Happy, healthy baby. So they became a family of 3, and they still are today. John just finished his first year of high school. Great kid and super smart too. You just never know what life's gonna throw at you. Story 69. Dated a girl college and we ended up taking each other's virginity. Skip ahead to my 4th year of college and a friend is hanging out with me and talking about his fiancée. He's super Christian and we're joking with him about losing his virginity once he's married. He tells us he's not sure how it'll be since both he and his fiancée have no experience. Shows us a picture. Guess who it is? They meet through a cross-college church thing at the start of their freshman years and had been dating for the past 2 years. Didn't really see any point in mentioning my history with her to him or anyone. I felt like a saint for not telling him the truth. As far as I know, they're happily married. Story 70. Was at a big art show with my wife and kids. We were walking up to a doorway and I noticed a couple of huge nude statues. I mean, like, no big deal to me. But I was worried about what the kid was going to say because he's a bit of a loud mouth at the best of times and I didn't need him yelling about private parts in the middle of a crowded art gallery. I realized the worst thing to do was make any kind of a scene about it. No covering eyes or anything. Just subtly angling the stroller away from the statues and making a big deal about art things on the opposite side of the aisle. Then the inevitable happens. I remember it happening in slow motion. Kid's head turns towards the naked statues. Eyes widen, arm raises and finger points. Mouth slowly opens. "Dad, look at those statues. They aren't wearing any socks." Story 71. Shy girl my mom teaches is so good at computers that she tracks her parents' texts and her dad's emails L because she found out her dad is cheating on her mom. Crazy crap. Story 72. Friend of mine, we'll call him Taylor, grew up thinking his father was his mom's HS boyfriend. Raised peacefully with co-parenting, everyone is happy. So he submits his DNA to 23 and me. Gets an email. There's another user who has similar DNA. So similar, in fact, he was probably his father. Taylor investigates and yep, this user went to high school with his mom. Confronts his mother and she admits it happened, but truthfully believed Taylor was her Beth's son. He looked up his father on Facebook, drove out to meet him. Everyone's respectful and he literally just has one more family. He still considers the man who raised him to be his dad. This is just like dad, no two. Story 73. Me and my cousin used to go to the gym together. He got some protein shake powder for his birthday. One tasted like blueberry. The other one was flavorless. After workout, we usually came home and prepared the shakes, sometimes with water, usually with milk. And sometimes we would drink the plain ones, sometimes with flavor. After some time, we noticed that the plain powder's packaging has a strawberry on it and that it says strawberry flavor. We thought it was a factory mistake or something. The year came around and my cousin had birthday again. Invited the same friends that brought him the proteins the year before. He shows the packaging and says that the present from the year before had a factory error. They laughs like crazy. It turns out that they pranked him by putting flour into an empty protein powder container, and we've drank 3 kilos of flour and milk water in the past year. They wanted to tell him after, but got too drunk and forgot about it. Story 74. I'm an overweight engineer and science nerd who sucks at sports and has no social skills. For most of my young life, I watched all the other guys get girlfriends after years of incompetent, piss-poor, feeble, and ineffective attempts to find a girlfriend. I gave up then at age 47, by some magical, nearly impossible stroke of luck. I met my wife happy together for 18 years and counting. Story 75. I'm from a relatively rural area in the South and went to HS with your average stereotypical white rural rednecks. Went back for a reunion and saw one of the redneckiest of backwoods hicks there with his wife. When I say redneckiest, I mean in high school he was a skull-chewing, pickup driving, rebel flag-waving, Appalachian Mountain redneck. His wife was very tall and looked familiar, but I couldn't place her from anywhere, so just chalked it up to her, having one of those faces, and didn't think anymore about it. Until later that night when Redneck Prime was wholesale beating another reunion in the parking lot, screaming, "She's a she-mother ducker!" Trans women are damn women. And I love my wife, and if you call her by her high school dead name one more time, she can visit my ass in prison, 'cause I'll beat you to death, ducker. Turns out the one kid in high school who was openly gay in the rural South in the mid-90s was actually a trans woman who hadn't come to that conclusion yet, transitioned and fell in mutual love with a dude I would have 100% assumed was a raging transphobe. Story 76. I grew up with these two country girls. They were completely inseparable. Best friends, forever matching bracelets type. They dated a few guys in high school, but nothing ever stuck. They went to college together and vacations together as best friends. Came back from Hawaii and announced they were dating. Everyone always joked around like, what if they were lesbians, LMAO? And then bam, they hit us with a relationship update on FB. I'm so happy for them. Story 77. In high school, I often stayed late to work on AV projects. In December 1998, I was shooting a segment for the school TV channel's annual holiday special. Specifically, my friend was interviewing students, faculty, and staff, those who happened to be around and willing to appear on camera, about their holiday memories. A particular take was spoiled when a group of students walked past and one of them shouted, "Hey, interview subject's nickname, your cock's hanging out." Enraged beyond reason, I spun the camera on its tripod, pointed it at the group of students, laughing as they headed out the nearest door, and informed the offender that I had him on tape. This later became the furthest thing from my mind when I learned that my mother had been critically injured in a head-on collision. The other car, which had veered into her lane, contained 3 girls from my school, the driver and 2 passengers. Tragically, one of the passengers died instantly. I didn't know any of these girls personally, but I learned the following day that the one who was killed was the 15-year-old sister of the friend who was interviewing people for my holiday segment. That's not the twist. A couple of weeks later, when I finally began reviewing and editing the footage, a classmate in the room with me made a startling discovery. Among the laughing students was my friend's sister. She was on her way to the car in which she was killed about 20 minutes later. I'd unwittingly recorded the last image of her alive and the last time she ever saw her brother. Story 78. We were living in Florida at the time, and my dad goes to the eye doctor because he's seeing double. In all other respects, he's healthy. He explains his symptoms to the doctor. This was the early 2000s. The doctor picks up a medical book on eye problems. He finds the kind symptoms my dad is describing. The doctor shows him the book. In the book, there is a whole medical page explaining what he is experiencing and a picture of a kid from the 1960s. My dad looks at the picture and says, "Doc, that's me." The doctor says, "Yes, those are the symptoms you are showing." My dad says, "No, really, that's me in the picture." It turns out my dad had this eye problem when he was a kid, and it was so rare that they took his picture in 1960s Ohio and slapped him in a book of rare eye problems. He doesn't remember much about taking the picture, but he did manage to get a copy of it to take home. Story 79. I dated a girl who lived in a city I had recently moved away from. On my birthday, I drove out so that we could be together, go out to dinner. The entire time we were at dinner, she was distant and constantly checking her phone, sending texts, etc. There was virtually no conversation, and her constant texting was uncharacteristic and started to give me the vibe that she was either cheating on me or just not that into the relationship anymore. When we finish eating, she asks if it's okay if we stop by a mutual friend's house to pick up some substances. I reluctantly agreed, thinking it was a pretty selfish request, considering it was my birthday and I don't smoke. As we're walking up the steps to our friend's apartment, I'm running through different ways for me to break off the relationship up until the door opens and I realize she had planned a big surprise party with a ton of my old friends, many of which she didn't even know. All of the texts and lack of attention that I had been attributing to a lack of interest in me turned out to be the exact opposite. She's a beautiful person. Story 80. I was putting myself through college as a single mom. Met another lady my age going for the same degree. We became friends, or so I thought. One day she just starts hating on me and gets a bunch of toadies to hate on me too. She accuses me of cheating and tries to get me kicked out of college. She tries to get me fired from substitute teaching by saying I was cheating. She tries to tell people I screw around with other people's husbands. Now, we're both like 30 years old. This is some high school bullcrap she's pulling. I'm trying to move on and meet this other lady going for the same degree. She tells me same thing happened to her with the same get woman. We graduate with our associates, and then the 2 of us go on to get our bachelors. She calls me up one day to say she ran into this chick at a restaurant where she, the friend, waitresses. Get woman is there with her toadies, and they all start yucking it up about what a loser I am. Friend tells them that I'm graduating summa cum laude with my bachelor's and working at General Motors. Get woman starts screaming so loudly that manager asks her to leave. Turns out, Get woman flunked out of getting her associates and then got fired from her nail salon for being a nasty person. She hadn't worked since, and her husband was about to leave her because of all the money she dumped into her education. Still pretty satisfied about the karma there. Story 81. While driving Lyft, 2 people had just gotten engaged. They were going back and forth about how much they love and trust each other. On and on. About 20 minutes into the ride, I found out that they met 2 days ago. Story 82. I met a guy on a cruise ship when I was 13. Long story short, we spent a few days talking and hanging out, and I basically fell head over heels. On the last night, we never got a chance to say goodbye or exchange numbers, and I only knew his first name. It should have been nothing more than a forgotten childhood fling, but for some reason I could never quite forget about him. I guess you could say he was my first love, in a naive sort of way. I went on to have a few long-term relationships, but I always found myself missing this guy I'd met so many years ago, and I left those future relationships feeling a kind of emptiness I can't explain. By a weird string of unlikely events that would take paragraphs to explain, I reconnected with this mystery cruise guy from my childhood 7 years later, at 20 years old. It took a few weeks for him to confirm with his family whether his cruise had been the exact same week as mine, but we confirmed they were the same length of time, both traveled to the same places, and happened around approximately the same time frame. Most significantly, though, the guy I reconnected with randomly told me a very specific story about something that happened at a band concert in 6th grade, and as he told it, I realized it was the exact same story the guy on the cruise had told me. He even told it the same way. We were still waiting for confirmation, but honestly, at this point, I was convinced this was the guy I met years ago. All the details kept lining up perfectly, and things just felt right somehow. We got really close over those next few weeks, talking for hours and hours on end and just really hitting it off. Then he hears back from his sister, and he finds out his cruise was a completely different year than mine, and there's no logical way we could have met before. We're still dating a year and a half later, though. Guess he was the one I was searching for after all. Story 83. I met this girl out at a bar, got her name and number, and we agreed to meet up for lunch. Lunch dates are nice because you automatically have a discrete time frame. We're chatting before ordering, and we get to talking about who I knew from the small town she was from. I say that she has the same last name as my cousins who live there, just spelled differently. She asks who and I could remember their first names, but the two youngest are twins. She say X and me. I say yes, that's it. We aren't a terribly close family. I look at her and she's curled up in the smallest posture in what feels like she is sitting behind her chair, and she says, I was married to X. I let out a tremendous laugh and said, I thought you sort of looked familiar. You were at Grandpa's funeral, right? She says yes, and I smirked, saying, thought you were cute then too. I hadn't eaten yet and was starving, so we ordered a sandwich and tried to pretend it wasn't weird. When the date ended, I called my mom immediately and told her coyly about the date I had. Me. Hey mom. Hey honey, how's it going, me? I just went on this date with this great girl, so much in common, blah blah blah. I don't know if we'll see each other again though. Mom. Why not? Me. You and Dad went to her first wedding. Couldn't have made a story up this good if I tried. Story 84. This will probably be super cliche, but my grandma had some rough days in a hospital bed. We were fearing for the worst, and all the family were taking turns to keep her company. This was way before cell phone existed, so communication wasn't as easy as today. So, my dad got a call one of those days, and it was my aunt that was with her. Of course, I don't know exactly what she said, but my dad understood that she was dead. We rushed over there, basically, as soon as he hung up because he wanted us to say goodbye. During the whole car trip, my dad was bawling his heart out. We arrived to the hospital. We were, of course, super sad. We already knew in which room she was, so we went directly there, ready to say goodbye. Except she wasn't dead at all. She was sitting in her bed eating soup with a nurse, like any other day. I was like 7-year-old at the time, and I really freaked out, but was extremely happy about the whole situation. We talked with her for some minutes, and my dad couldn't stop crying and hugging her. My aunt wasn't in the room, but she arrived a little later, and my mom was incredibly mad at her for the false alarm. My aunt insisted several times that she never said that our grandma was dead. However, in the next half hour or so, the rest of our family arrived to the hospital too because everybody received a similar call from my aunt, and everybody had the same idea that grandma was dead. I don't remember the exact details, but as far as I recall, the thing was that my grandma had some sort of minor stroke and her heart stopped for a few seconds. But somehow, my aunt blew the thing off proportions on the phone calls. We ended up basically having a party on her room that day because all of us were together, which was a very rare scenario in my extended family. And I felt that the sadness we felt before arriving to the hospital made us appreciate more the happiness. And I think that somehow, that impromptu family party helped my grandma recover, and she managed to live for a few more years after that. Story 85. I dated a girl who was very beautiful, but also very high maintenance. She would complain that I never spent any money on her as we were walking out of a restaurant where I ate salad and drank water so she could have a $50 dinner. On our 2 meager paychecks, server, cook, she would always talk about traveling halfway around the world to somewhere like Hawaii, Mexico, Japan, Australia, etc. So one night I'm at a party, smoking on the porch with the boys, and this one guy is like, "So you're dating her? You're so lucky. I've had a crush on her since 4th grade. Now he was what you might call a rich guy. His family had tons of money. In an instant, it clicked. I shouldn't be dating her. He should be dating her. So I yelled, "Hey baby, come out here. I need to talk to you." Crazy drunk decision. I told her straight up what I thought, that if she wants someone who spends money on her, here's her guy. Of course, she thought I was joking at first, but I persisted. We all had an uncomfortable evening, but I managed to break up without too many tears or upset. So a couple weeks go by, and soon the word around town is that they are an item now. A cute couple. And oh, did you hear he's taking her to Spain? Well, she always did want to travel, good for them. So I ran into him a couple months later. Hey bro, how was your trip to Spain? Silence. How's girlfriend? She got married to a guy in Spain. She stayed there. Oh, story 86. Roommate in college's story. He dated an identical twin in high school. He's walking down the hall and spots her. He jokingly goes up and grabs her in a big hug and grabs her ass. She pushed him off, saying, I'm not twin one, I'm twin two. He obviously feels bad and starts apologizing, but then she's like, just kidding, gotcha. And they kiss, and she walks away. Plot twist, nope, it was T2. They were pulling a switcheroo so she could cheat and take the one's test for her. She ruined her cover right in front of the teacher, which is why she quickly said she was just kidding and even kissed him to prove it. His GF thought it was pretty funny. Story 87. I managed a retail store that was part of a small chain of retail stores in my state. Our lease was running out, so they put me to the task of finding a new place to put our shop. I found a spot, talked to the landlord, got paperwork, and a meeting set up for my upper management, etc. They came into town for the meeting and told me they were closing my shop down in exactly 2 weeks, something they decided on long before putting me to the task of finding a new place. It was approaching summer, and it's hard to find jobs here around that time. And they wanted to make sure I wouldn't be leaving 4 months before we shut down because they still wanted to make a little money off of it. Story 88. A few years ago, my parents kept calling me trying to meet up so we can talk. I'm one of 6 to give you an idea. So they kept calling trying to meet up, but I kept avoiding it because I feared the worst. So finally, my dad calls and asks if I can come over to his buddy's house after work to help him move something. I got off work and was walking to my car, and I see my dad standing by my car. He tells me to get in his car and says we need to talk. Before he said anything, I said, I think I know what this is about. You and Mom are getting a divorce, aren't y'all? He said no and told me that I have another sister who was adopted out when she was born, due to their financial situation at the time. Remember, I'm one of 6. Well, now one of 7. I was about 22 when he told me, I'm 27 now, she's 26. How did none of us know my mom was pregnant? Guess we were young. I was around 1, and the oldest of us was maybe around 4, 5, and 2 weren't born yet. Story 89. My buddy started dating this girl. She was from the opposite side of the country, says her dad is some mega rich guy in Singapore or the Philippines. She says she has a large trust. They get pretty serious and she rents this luxurious condo here, buys a brand new Escalade, a dog, he moves in with her. He's a tit guy, so she goes and has her tits done. She says she has to go back across the country every so often to see her sisters and family. This goes on for a year or 2. My buddy always asks to go with her to meet her sisters and family, and finally she agrees over Thanksgiving, but says he has to get a hotel room because she doesn't want her family to know she's living with someone outside of marriage. Thanksgiving morning, he wakes up to a knock on the door. She's not in the room, so he answers it, and it's some random guy who turns out to be his girlfriend's husband. Her sisters, she has the pics of and talks about, are her children, and her husband is the super wealthy one, not her dad. They sat and talked for a good half hour, and then I got a phone call on Thanksgiving, asking if I can pick him up at the airport later that evening. Oh, and she said she was our age at the time, 24-ish, and turns out she was 38. Crazy. Story 90. My dad, who was always this quiet guy, snapped. Living in Qatar, working, wrote Mom an email after 37 years saying he wasn't coming home and he was going to go with some other woman from the next town over from where we live. Said to Mom, I should have won an Oscar for faking my love for the years we were together. Mom still hasn't gotten over it in 2011. Everything our family built was broken in the amount of time it took him to hit send. Story 91. Happened this week. I grew up Mormon, and when I realized I was gay, I did reparative therapy to help make me straight. Fast forward a few years to today, I'm out and a happy gay man, and I see a pic on Facebook of my ex-therapist with his boyfriend. I was shocked. Story 92. Probably when my very Christian mate's very Christian wife left him for her boss. Affairs are fairly common, I understand, but this was so out of left field. I was shocked for some time. He is considerably more of a catch than she is, and he absolutely doted on her. Still, that's the thing with being Christian, though. Once she moved in with the other guy and it didn't work out, she managed to put pressure on him via the church to take her back, which he did. Story 93. I was telling a client about a guy I met where I spend my summers. A real piece of work who had a bad reputation in town because he was caught cheating on his wife more than once and flashed money around like he was rich. He blew all his money trying to develop some property and now was running out of businesses in town who would work with him. She asked his name. It was her fiancé. So now I'm on the phone with my client who is crying because she was planning her wedding to a guy who had no money, but a wife. Did see that day coming? I'm too old for this drama. Story 94. A friend of mine from high school married her high school sweetheart. Both of them then joined the military, and both were deployed. They came to the agreement that they would wait until their service was over. She would finish school, and then they'd try to have children. So they both get out of the military and she starts school. Then he drops a bomb. He doesn't want to have kids at all. So she divorced him. There were also other issues they struggled with, and she was done with his crap at this point. Fast forward a few months, and he has a new girlfriend who has a 2-year-old baby. But wait, there's more. This girl is not a stranger to my friend. New GF was flown out to where my friend and her git of an ex were stationed together, right around 2 years ago. Story 95. My wife and I and my sister and her husband had kids very close together time-wise. My second child and her third were born 2 weeks apart. We told each other about the pregnancies together, each having no clue the other was about to share similar news. Later, for my third and her second, the same thing happened again, 2 weeks apart. At this point, we're done, but I know my sister is planning on having another. Time progresses, and she announces that she's pregnant again. My time to shine. I've been sitting on this joke for a couple years, and without missing a beat, and somehow with a straight face, I respond, "Us too!" Plot twist. A week later, we find out we're having an unexpected fourth, born 2 weeks after my sister's third. Story 96. A week into my relationship with my first serious boyfriend, his ex messaged me. She was nice and didn't hide who she was and subtly told me how much of a tool he was. I'm a nice person, so I was friendly to her even though it was a little strange. Turns out he was a compulsive liar, constantly accused me of cheating on him, was messaging other girls at my school, and basically a douche nozzle. I continued talking to his ex after I left him for good, and now we are best friends. We met in person for the first time when we went to the same college. Later, she talked me into applying for a position with her, and we still work together 7.5 years later. Not all exes are crazy. Story 97. I once went on a date with a girl. She was nice, but not really my type. I did not call her after the first date. 1 month later, I got a new job. The first day I show up at my office, my boss introduces me to the person who will be training me. Lo and behold, it was this girl. We became friends later, so it wasn't too bad. Story 98. My brother-in-law had ruined his life by the time he was 36. He lost his kids, his girlfriend, his job, his car, his license, his family, etc. At 38, he decides to get his life back together and really doubles down on getting a steady job and proving that he is over his addiction. Over the course of a year, he earned back everyone's trust and got promotions. He had just met his children again for the first time in years. It was a real comeback story. Next day, he is found dead in his room from an overdose.